This section of the keyboard is very similar to the original Mini Moog. It has 3 oscillators, 3 notes that can play per key. The keyboard itself is monophonic. It doesn't play chords, but you can tune each one of the 3 oscillators to the same or different notes. It helps create a really fat sound, so most people tune them to the same note or octaves of the same note. Right now I'll use it with 1 oscillator only. We're going to take the sound of 1 oscillator, and that was one of the key concepts on this keyboard, to make sure that 1 note, purest, simplest sound, without filtering or any tricks, would sound good. Here's the single oscillator. It's a nice, rich, fat, full kind of sound. Definitely part of the analog synthesizer tone. We've got octave switching on the oscillator and on the other 2 as well, so we can change it from the lowest octave all the way up to the highest. On the early Mini Moogs, the old ones from the 70s, that was a bit of trouble to keep it in tune across those ranges, but this stays in tune very, very well. We have one extra setting that was never available on the original Mini Moog. It has 1 more octave stop higher. Down below the octave setting is the waveform setting. On the original Mini Moog, it was a stepped position. You can switch between a few specific waveforms. On this Mini Moog, you can sweep between quite a few of the waveforms, getting sine waves, square waves, triangle waves, sawtooth waves, things like that as we move the knob. Let's listen to the sound change as we use just 1 oscillator and we move the waveform. Each waveform has a different tonality to it. It's not with any filtering or anything. It's a very simple shaping of the sound. Some are more hollow, some are more buzzy. And that's how you come up with the basic beginning of a sound. Something that's very interesting to work with is you choosing the waveforms you like for things. We can do that with each of the oscillators as well too. Let's take the first oscillator and we'll add a second to it to get a little bit richer sound to it. So we'll start with 1 oscillator on, and I'll switch in the second. Now I've got a thicker sound. It sounds much better, more like a 12-string guitar would when it has 2 notes tuned to the same. So we get a unison effect, but it's much thicker, a bit more chorused, if you will. And again, I can change octaves. We have waveform control of both oscillators. And I've got tuning for the second oscillator, a fine tune against the first one. I can put it dead in tune with the first one, or I can detune it a bit, or quite a lot. So we get a range of sounds just with 2 oscillators. Let's add the third in there as well too. Very characteristic of the Mini Moog sound that people know from the past. It has 3 oscillators, very thick. Most instruments of the time only had 2 oscillators, so the third definitely gives you a bit of boost, a bit of extra sound to work with. We've got a thicker sound now, especially for bass, if you want to use that too. Again, octave switching on each one, waveform control, and we've got tuning on the third one as well too. Directly below the oscillators are a set of 4 red switches. These switches are pretty powerful. They do a lot of things, very interesting tricks. So let's show you what they do. The first one synchronizes oscillator 1 and 2 together. It's called a hard sync, and the oscillator will follow the pitch of the other oscillator. Even when I try to detune it, it stays in the same pitch of the first oscillator. So oscillator 2 is now synchronized to oscillator 1. If I try to detune it, it remains in the same pitch, but the waveform will change. Listen to what it does here. I'm still getting the G sharp note that I'm playing on the keyboard, even though I try to detune it. This is a very common synth sound nowadays called hard sync. I can even change octaves here. It gives different effects. It's a great sound. It's very simple to do. And oscillator 2 remains on the pitch of the first oscillator. The next red switch is called 3 to 1 FM. I'm connecting oscillator 3 into oscillator 1, using the voltage from 3 as it sweeps up and down to affect the pitch of oscillator 1. When they're both running very quickly, you don't hear much. You hear a bit of a grind, a bit of change. That's not normally how people would use it. What we normally do is we switch over to the very bottom switch here, putting oscillator 3 to a very low frequency range. low frequency, so you don't hear it as an audio oscillator. It's just a very slow sweep up and down. And you'll hear what it does now to the pitch of oscillator 1. The waveform of 3, the shape it's got, is driving oscillator 1 up and down. I can still adjust the octaves and the tuning here, but it's so much slower than it was before with the low frequency switch on. So it's an interesting way to get some nice modulation, some strange sounds happening besides just the basic vibrato. Great for siren effects, things like that. The last switch we have to talk about is oscillator 3 on keyboard control. Normally, when you go up and down the keyboard, all 3 oscillators follow the keyboard pitch. They go higher as the keyboard goes higher, they go lower as the keyboard goes lower. For effects like we've been doing, oscillator 3 is still tracking. It goes much faster as we go up and down the keyboard. If you want a static state, though, on oscillator 3, you can switch it off so it doesn't track the keyboard anymore. Therefore, my siren-type sound will remain at the same tempo, even though the pitch is going up on oscillator 1. We'll turn oscillator 3 back into an audio oscillator. Instead of being a low-frequency oscillator, we'll make it go to the fast speed, where it's normally in tune with the other oscillators. We can hear it again. And I've still disconnected it from the keyboard, so now it's going to drone. And oscillator 1 is playing the pitches I play. So you can use that anytime you want a nice drone effect. You can switch off oscillator 3 keyboard control. Directly across from the oscillator section, we've got the mixer section. It's very simple. We've got switches for each of the 3 oscillators right here. Oscillator 1, 2, and 3. Certainly any combination of those can be used. We've got level control for each one as well, too. You can create new combinations by balancing those in different ratios. At the bottom we've got a noise source. Adds to the mixer as well. Noise is good for creating wind effects, anything like that. Can be mixed with the oscillators or not. And at the top, by the flashing light, we have external audio plugged into it. You can feed any signal in through the back of the keyboard. You could run a CD player, any tracks you've recorded, guitars, bass, vocals, drums, things like that, and feed them in as well too. In this case, we've got a drum track coming through. Any sound you feed through here can be processed through the synth just like the rest of the oscillators are. So our steady droning oscillators are certainly shaped by the rest of the synth, creating new sounds. We can also shape this sound as a raw material.